My mother ordered champagne before the body was even cold. Actually, that is not quite right. There was no body. When she called me at 7 in the morning, her voice trembling with fake grief, to tell me my grandfather had passed away, in the night she did not know the truth. She did not know that Grandpa Elijah was sitting right across from me at the kitchen table, spreading butter on his toast and listening to her every word on speakerphone. She told me I was homeless. She told me I was cut out of the will. She told me the family was finally free of his controlling grip. I watched my grandfather's hand shake as he held his coffee mug. His eyes filled with a pain that had nothing to do with old age and everything to do with betrayal. That morning, my family thought they were burying a patriarch, but they were actually digging their own graves. Before I tell you how we let them walk into their own trap, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to sit back and watch karma do its work on the people who hurt you the most. My name is Sophia, and at 35 years old, I thought I had seen the worst of human nature in my job as a forensic accountant. I spend my days tracking down hidden assets and exposing white-collar criminals who steal from their companies. But nothing could have prepared me for the crime that was about to take place in my own living room. It started on a Tuesday morning in Atlanta. The Georgia sun was just beginning to filter through the heavy curtains of the estate where I had lived with my grandfather for the past 6 months. The house was a sprawling, historic mansion that Grandpa Elijah had bought in the 70s, a symbol of Black excellence and resilience that he had built from the ground up. To my parents and my sister, this house was just a pile of money waiting to be liquidated. To us, it was history. Grandpa Elijah looked good that morning. The doctors had given him a clean bill of health after a scare the previous winter, a secret we had kept between us, to avoid the vultures circling. He was 85, but his mind was as sharp as a razor. He was wearing his favorite silk robe, reading the financial section of the newspaper. Then my phone rang. The screen flashed Mom. I looked at Grandpa. He nodded, signaling me to answer. I tapped the speaker button and set the phone down between the bowl of grits and the platter of fruit. Sophia, pick up my mother. Beatrice's voice was shrill, cutting through the peace of the morning. I am here, Mom, I said, keeping my voice steady. What is wrong? It is your grandfather, she said. She paused for effect, letting out a dramatic, shuddering breath. The hospital just called us. There was a mix-up with the patient records, but they confirmed it. He passed away in his sleep last night. My eyes widened. I looked at Grandpa. He stopped chewing. The hospital must have confused him with another Elijah Washington. It was a clerical error, a simple mistake. But my mother did not sound devastated. Underneath the performance of grief, there was a vibration of excitement, a hum of anticipation that made my stomach turn. Oh my God, I managed to say, playing along. Mom, are you sure? Yes, we are devastated. She rushed on, skipping past the mourning phase with alarming speed. But listen to me, Sophia. We need to be practical. Dad and I have already spoken to the lawyers. The will from 10 years ago is the standing document. That means Marcus, your father, is the sole executor. I watched Grandpa's face. He did not look angry. He looked heartbroken. A single tear tracked through the deep lines of his face, getting lost in his gray beard. He had spent his whole life building a legacy for these people. He had paid for my father's failed businesses. He had paid for my sister Chloe's modeling classes and her husband Brad's gambling debts. And this was their reaction to his death. Business. Sophia, are you still there? My mother snapped. Yes, I am here, I whispered. Good, she said, her voice dropping to a cold, hard register. Now, here is the reality. We know Grandpa let you crash in that house while you played nursemaid, and we appreciate it. But that arrangement ends today. Brad and Chloe are already on their way over with the contractors. We are listing the property. Contractors? I asked, my voice rising. Mom, he just died. You are selling the house today. We have to move fast, Beatrice said, dismissing my emotion. The market is hot, and frankly, Sophia, we know Grandpa gave you that little allowance, but the will is clear. You get nothing. The estate goes to us. So pack your bags. I want you out of the master suite before we get there. Do not steal anything. We have an inventory list. My father's voice boomed in the background. Tell her to leave the keys to the vintage Jaguar Beatrice. I do not want her driving that thing off the lot. And tell her the locks are being changed at noon. Another voice chimed in. It was Brad, my brother-in-law. Grandpa Elijah closed his eyes. His hand was trembling so hard that coffee sloshed over the rim of his mug, staining the white tablecloth. I reached out and covered his hand with mine. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them he was right here, that he was listening to them discuss stripping his corpse for parts like a stolen car. I opened my mouth to yell to defend him, but Grandpa squeezed my hand. His grip was surprisingly strong. He opened his eyes, and the sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, steely resolve that I remembered from his days as a business tycoon. He shook his head. One finger went to his lips. Shh. Let them come, he mouthed silently. I took a deep breath. Okay, Mom, I said, my voice shaking with genuine rage that she mistook for defeat. I will pack. Good, she said. We will be there in 20 minutes. Do not make this difficult, Sophia. You have always been the difficult one. The line went dead. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, suffocating. I looked at Grandpa. Grandpa. I started, tears pricking my eyes. I am so sorry. I am so sorry you had to hear that. He took a napkin and wiped the spilled coffee, his movements slow and deliberate. Do not be sorry, Sophia, he said, his voice raspy but firm. Be ready. He stood up, tightening the belt of his robe. Call Vance. Tell him to bring the paperwork, the new paperwork, and tell him to come through the back gate. Lawyer Vance was Grandpa's oldest friend and the only person outside of this room who knew the true state of his affairs. What are we going to do? I asked. We are going to give them exactly what they want, Grandpa said, walking toward the library. They want a dead man. I will give them a dead man. He pointed to the large mahogany bookshelf that covered the east wall of the library. Behind it was a panic room fully ventilated and equipped with security monitors built during the civil rights era, when threats against black businessmen were physical and violent. Today the threat was financial, and it was coming from his own bloodline. Help me set up the cameras, he commanded. I want to see everything. I want to hear everything. If they want to inherit my legacy, let us see if they are worthy of it. We moved fast. My training as an auditor kicked in. I was used to securing evidence. I placed a hidden camera in the bookshelf, one in the living room chandelier, and left my laptop open in the kitchen with the webcam recording. Grandpa went into the panic room. It was comfortable inside with a leather armchair and a bank of screens linked to the security system. Sophia, he said through the crack in the door, no matter what they say to you, no matter how much they insult you, you do not break character. You are the grieving granddaughter who has lost everything. Let them show us who they really are. I promise, I said. He closed the heavy door and the bookshelf slid back into place, just as the sound of gravel crunching under tires echoed from the driveway. They were here. I looked out the window. It was a convoy. My parents' Mercedes led the way, followed by Brad's flashy Range Rover, and behind them a white work van with aggressive lettering that read, Premier Demolition and Renovations. They had not come to mourn. They had come to raid. I smoothed down my hair, forced tears into my eyes, and opened the front door. My mother, Beatrice, was the first one out. She was not wearing black. She was wearing a bright floral dress, sunglasses perched on her head, looking like she was arriving for a brunch date. My father, Marcus, was already on his phone, pacing the driveway. So sad, Marcus was saying into the phone, his voice loud and performative. Yes, a massive heart attack. We are devastated. Listen, about that listing price, I think we can go higher. The location is prime. My sister Chloe hopped out of the Range Rover, phone in hand, ring light attached. She was already filming. Guys, today is the saddest day, she whispered to her followers, pouting her lips. My grandpa just passed. I am at his mansion now. It is going to be so hard to say goodbye to this place. But stay tuned for the house tour. Brad, her husband, bypassed me completely. He didn't even look at me. He marched straight up the steps carrying a toolbox. "Where is the safe, Sophia?" he barked as he brushed past me, his shoulder checking mine. "Hello to you too, Brad," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Grandpa is not even at the funeral home yet." Brad stopped and turned a sneer curling his lip. He looked me up and down, taking in my simple t-shirt and jeans. "Look, Sophia, we don't have time for your sentimental garbage. The old man is dead. This house belongs to the real family now. If you are not helping us find the deed and the jewelry, get out of the way." My mother stepped up to me, pulling a disinfectant wipe from her purse and wiping the door handle I had just touched. "You heard him, Sophia. Do not stand there looking pathetic. Did you pack your things?" I pointed to a single duffel bag in the hallway. "Good," she said. "Now give me the keys to the Jaguar. Your father wants to take it for a spin." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the keys. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer effort it took not to slap the smile off her face. I dropped the keys into her palm. She didn't say thank you. She just closed her fingers around them tight. "Oh, and Sophia," she added, stepping into the foyer and looking around with a critical eye. "Do not expect to stay for lunch. We ordered catering, but it is for family and business associates. You can grab something on your way out." I watched them swarm into the house like locusts. Chloe was already posing on the grand staircase. Brad was hammering at the lock of Grandpa's study. My father was loudly discussing how much the vintage jazz records would fetch on eBay. I looked toward the library where the bookshelf stood silent and innocent. I knew Grandpa was watching. I knew he was seeing his son calculate the value of his life in dollars and cents. I took a deep breath and walked back into the kitchen. I wasn't leaving. Not yet. The show was just beginning. They swept into the hallway like a hurricane of entitlement, bringing with them the scent of expensive perfume and the cold air of indifference. I stood by the kitchen island, bracing myself for the performance of a lifetime. I expected tears, perhaps even a moment of silence, for the man who had funded their lavish lifestyles for decades. But as the heavy oak door slammed shut behind them, the silence was instantly shattered, not by grief but by greed. Brad did not even take off his sunglasses inside the house. He marched right up to me, his heavy boots leaving mud streaks on the pristine marble floors that Grandpa used to polish himself on Sundays. Brad was a man who thought wearing a suit made him a businessman, but his eyes were always darting around looking for the next hustle. He stopped inches from my face, invading my personal space, with the confidence of a man who believed he now owned everything I was standing on. So he said, his voice void of any sympathy, "Where is it?" I blinked, feigning confusion. "Where is what, Brad? Grandpa just died. Is that really the first thing you have to say?" "Cut the act, Sophia," he snapped, looking past me toward the hallway that led to the private study. "The deed, the portfolio, the keys to the safe deposit box. We know the old man kept the master files here. We have buyers lined up for the land in Buckhead, and I am not losing a multi-million-dollar commission because you want to play grieving granddaughter." My father Marcus walked in behind him, loosening his tie, as if the mere act of entering his father's house was a burden. He looked at me with eyes that were glazed over, likely from a pre-arrival drink. "Just tell him where the papers are, Sophia," Dad muttered, walking straight to the liquor cabinet and pouring himself a glass of Grandpa's vintage bourbon. "We need to get the inventory done before the funeral directors arrive." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Not one of them had asked how he died. Not one of them had asked if he was in pain. They had stepped over the metaphorical body of their patriarch and were already rifling through his pockets. "I do not have the combination," I lied, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "Grandpa never gave it to me. He said business was for family and I was just here to help." Brad let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "At least you know your place." While Brad and my father began arguing about the potential resale value of the antique chandelier hanging above us, I heard a rhythmic thumping sound coming from the stairs. I turned just in time to see my mother Beatrice descending the staircase. She was dragging my leather suitcase, the one I had packed only minutes ago, down the steps. It hit each step with a heavy, hollow thud that echoed through the silent house. Thud, thud, thud. With a final heave, she shoved it off the last step. It slid across the floor and came to rest at my feet. There, she said, dusting off her hands as if she had just taken out the trash. That is the last of it. Mom, I said, looking from the bag to her face. What is this? It is your exit strategy, darling, she said, flashing a tight, artificial smile. We need the master suite, and the guest rooms are going to be occupied by the staging team starting tomorrow. We are turning this place into a showroom. But where am I supposed to go? I asked, channeling every ounce of vulnerability I could muster. I gave up my apartment to care for Grandpa. I have nowhere else. Beatrice sighed, the sound of a woman inconvenienced by a stray cat. Oh, stop being dramatic. You have that little job of yours. What is it you do again? Counting pennies for corporations. Surely you can afford a motel. It is forensic accounting, Mom, I said quietly. I uncover fraud. Same difference. She waved her hand dismissively. Boring, and frankly, depressing. We need positive energy in this house to attract the right buyers. Speaking of energy, she turned her head, shouting up the stairs. Chloe, honey, is the lighting okay in the east wing? My sister Chloe appeared at the top of the banister. She was holding her phone up, the ring light reflecting in her perfectly manicured nails. She looked down at me, not with hatred, but with the pity one reserves for a roadkill animal. It is perfect! Mom, Chloe chirped, her voice rising an octave as she spoke to her live stream audience. Hey guys, so I am here at the family estate. It is super tragic my grandpa just passed, but we are trying to stay strong and honor his memory by showing you guys this vintage architecture. Look at these ceilings. She panned the camera down to me. And there is my sister Sophia. Say hi, Sophia. I turned away, but Chloe hurried down the stairs, shoving the phone in my face. She is a little camera shy, Chloe narrated to her followers. She is an accountant, so not exactly used to the spotlight like we are. Sophia, tell them how grateful you are that the family is here to take over the burden of the estate. I looked into the lens of her phone. I saw the comments scrolling by. Sorry for your loss. Followed by, is that the sister who looks like the maid? I am grateful, I said, staring directly at the camera, knowing Grandpa was watching this feed from the basement. I am grateful that the truth always comes out in the end. Chloe rolled her eyes and ended the live stream. Ugh, you are so weird, Sophia. This is why Mom wants you out. You bring down the vibe. I need this room for my unboxing videos. The acoustics in here are way better than my apartment. Do you know how hard it is to be a content creator? It is actual work, unlike staring at spreadsheets all day. I bit my tongue. I wanted to tell her that my boring spreadsheets had uncovered embezzlement schemes worth millions. I wanted to tell her that I made more in a month than she made in a year of selling diet teas online, but I stayed silent. I picked up my suitcase. Fine, I said. I will wait on the porch for my Uber. No, Brad interrupted. He had abandoned the liquor cabinet and was now holding a heavy red toolbox he had brought in from his truck. He walked past me, heading straight for the solid oak doors of Grandpa's private study, the only room in the house that was always locked, the room where Grandpa kept his most personal journals and the original company seal. You are not going anywhere until I get into this office, Brad growled. If you do not have the key, I am making my own entrance. Brad, no, I shouted, dropping my bag and running after him. That is an antique door. Grandpa carved it himself. You cannot just destroy it. Watch me, Brad spat. He dropped the toolbox with a crash. He didn't even bother looking for a lockpick. He pulled out a heavy-duty power drill and a crowbar. The sound of the drill bit whirring to life screamed through the house, a violent mechanical shriek that made me flinch. This is destruction of property, I warned him, my heart pounding. It is renovation, he corrected, pressing the drill bit against the brass lock. And it is my property now. I have a buyer flying in from New York on Friday. He wants the land cleared for a luxury condo complex. I need that company seal to authorize the demolition permit. Demolition, I whispered. You are going to tear the house down. It is just wood and brick, Sophia, my father called out from the living room, not even looking up from his phone. It is worth more as dirt. Let Brad do his job. I watched in horror, or at least the performance of horror, as Brad drove the drill into the metal. Sparks flew. The wood splintered. It was a violent act, a physical violation of the home Grandpa had built to shelter these very people. The lock gave way with a sickening crack. Brad kicked the door open, the wood fracturing around the hinges. He stood in the doorway of the dark study, breathing hard, looking like a pirate who had just breached the hull of a ship. Finally, he grinned, turning back to look at us. Time to cash out. He stepped into the darkness of the study, completely unaware that the hidden camera on the bookshelf inside was capturing every single second of his crime. I picked up my suitcase, my hand trembling not with fear, but with the adrenaline of the hunt. They had just broken into a dead man's office. They had just evicted the only person who actually loved him. And they had just given me all the evidence I needed to destroy them. The sound of shattering vinyl was the soundtrack to my nightmare. I stood frozen in the hallway as Brad tossed a stack of records into a heavy-duty trash bag, like they were nothing more than old frisbees. These were not just records. They were first pressings of Miles Davis, John Coltrane, and Billie Holiday. They were the rhythm of my grandfather's life, the music that had played softly in the background of every Sunday dinner and every Christmas morning for 40 years. Brad held up a framed painting by a renowned Harlem Renaissance artist, squinting at it with disdain. "This stuff is so dark," Brad complained, wiping dust from his hands onto his designer jeans. "It is depressing. Who wants to buy a luxury condo with this kind of heavy energy on the walls? We need abstract. We need white beige, maybe some gold accents. This looks like something you would find at a garage sale in a bad neighborhood." He tossed the painting onto a pile of debris he had created in the center of the foyer. The frame cracked with a sickening snap. "Stop it!" I screamed, the words ripping out of my throat before I could stop them. I lunged forward, grabbing the painting before he could stomp on it to make room for more. "Brad? Are you insane? That is a Romar Bearden original. It is worth more than your car. It is history. You cannot just throw it away like garbage." Brad laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "History does not pay the mortgage, Sophia," he sneered. "And frankly, it is the wrong kind of history for the demographic we are targeting. We are selling a lifestyle here. Modern, clean, not whatever this is." He kicked the pile of records, sending a shard of black vinyl skittering across the marble floor. "It is trash, Sophia, just like this old house. It is outdated." I fell to my knees, gathering the records, trying to shield them with my body. My hands were shaking. I felt a shadow loom over me. I looked up, expecting to see my mother, but it was my father, Marcus. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the painting to my chest. "Dad, tell him," I pleaded. "You grew up listening to these records. You know how much Grandpa loved them. This is our heritage. You cannot let him erase us like this." My father looked at me, his eyes bloodshot and glassy. He held a tumbler of scotch in one hand, swaying slightly. He looked at the painting in my arms, then at Brad, and finally at me. For a second, I saw a flicker of recognition, a memory of the father he used to be before the greed consumed him. But then he looked at the expensive watch on his wrist, a watch he had bought with money borrowed from Grandpa, and the moment passed. "Sophia, put it down," he said, his voice slurring slightly. "Dad, please," I whispered. "I said put it down," he roared. He stepped forward and swung his hand. The slap connected with my cheek with a sharp, stinging force that snapped my head to the side. The painting flew from my hands, landing face down on the hard floor. I stumbled back, clutching my face. The physical pain was sharp, but the emotional shock was paralyzed. My father had never hit me. Not once in 35 years. "Don't you dare lecture me about heritage," my father spat, standing over me. "You think history pays the bills. You think your little sentimental feelings matter in the real world. Brad has a vision. He is going to turn this dusty old museum into a gold mine. That is reality, Sophia. Money is reality. Everything else is just noise. He turned his back on me, signaling to Brad. Get rid of it all, Marcus said. If she touches anything else, throw her out too. I retreated to the kitchen, my cheek throbbing, tears streaming down my face. I did not cry because of the pain. I cried because in that moment, I realized my father was truly gone. The man who had raised me had been replaced by a monster who would sell his own culture for a quick payout. I spent the rest of the afternoon locked in the guest bathroom, pressing a cold towel to my face. I could hear them moving through the house, the sounds of destruction echoing through the vents. They were stripping the soul out of the building room by room. By midnight, the house was quiet save for the sound of laughter coming from the living room. They had opened several bottles of Grandpa's vintage wine and were celebrating their first day of demolition. I crept out the back door into the cool night air. The large industrial dumpster Brad had ordered was sitting in the driveway, illuminated by the pale moonlight. It was overflowing with black trash bags. I climbed up the side, not caring about the dirt on my clothes or the smell of dust and old wood. I began to dig. I worked silently, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I found the bag with the records. Most were broken, snapped in half by Brad's carelessness, but a few were intact. I found the Bearden painting. The frame was shattered, but the canvas was miraculously unharmed. I found Grandpa's old photo albums, the ones showing him marching in the 60s, the ones showing the day he bought this land. I hugged the albums to my chest, sitting in the dirt next to the dumpster, trying to muffle my sobs. Inside the house, I could hear the clink of crystal glasses and my sister Chloe's high-pitched laughter. They were toasting to their future while I was outside in the mud, trying to save our past. Suddenly, the back door opened. I froze, shrinking into the shadows of the large oak tree near the porch. Brad walked out, a cigar in one hand and his phone in the other. He didn't see me. He walked to the edge of the patio, looking out over the sprawling backyard. Yeah, I am looking at it right now, Brad said into the phone. No, listen to me. The trees are a problem. They block the view of the skyline. I want them gone. He took a puff of the cigar, the smoke drifting toward me. And the garden in the back, he continued. Yeah, the one with the stone markers. I don't care what they are. Just bulldoze it. We need that space for the resident parking lot. You cannot have luxury condos without ample parking. My blood ran cold. He wasn't talking about a vegetable garden. He was talking about the memorial garden. The place where my grandmother's ashes were scattered. The place where Grandpa had set up a small stone monument for his own parents who had been sharecroppers. It was sacred ground. Just get the crew here at 7 a.m., Brad said, flicking ash onto the pristine grass. I want that dirt flat by noon. Dig it all up. If you find any bones, just toss them. I am not halting construction for some superstitious nonsense. He laughed, a cruel sound that made my skin crawl. All right. See you tomorrow. Bring the heavy machinery. He hung up and walked back inside, sliding the glass door shut. I sat there in the darkness, the photo albums pressed against my heart. They were not just erasing art anymore. They were planning to desecrate graves. They were going to pave over my grandmother to park their BMWs. I looked up at the security camera mounted on the corner of the garage. The little red light blinked at me in the darkness. I knew Grandpa was watching. I knew he had heard every word. I wiped the tears from my face. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury. They wanted a war. They wanted to bury us. But they forgot that we were seeds. I stood up, dusting off my jeans. I picked up the bag of rescued memories and walked toward the basement entrance. I had to warn Grandpa. We didn't have days anymore. We only had hours. The bulldozers were coming at dawn, and if we didn't stop them, there would be nothing left to save. The silence that descended on the house after the front door slammed was heavy, but it was also liberating. My family had left in a convoy of luxury vehicles heading to Phipps Plaza under the pretense of shopping for funeral attire. My mother had loudly announced that she needed something in a specific shade of charcoal silk because regular black was too pedestrian for the cameras. Chloe needed waterproof mascara for her staged crying sessions, and Brad claimed he needed a stiff drink at the country club to handle the stress of being the new patriarch. They were gone. And for the first time in 24 hours, the house felt like ours again. But I did not have time to bask in the quiet. I had work to do. I walked into the kitchen where Brad had carelessly left his laptop open on the marble island. It was a sleek silver machine, pulsating with the faint light of sleep mode. This was the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. He thought I was just a stupid girl who counted beans for a living. He had no idea that my job involved tearing apart the digital lives of executives far smarter and more dangerous than him. I sat down on the bar stool and woke the computer up. It asked for a password. I tried his birthday. Incorrect. I tried his anniversary. Incorrect. Then I tried the license plate of the new Porsche he had been bragging about all morning. Access granted. I almost laughed. Men like Brad were predictable. They worshipped their toys more than their families. I cracked my knuckles and opened his browser history, his email client, and his banking apps. Forensic accounting is not just about math. It is about storytelling. Numbers tell a story of who a person really is, what they fear, and what they desire. And Brad's numbers were screaming a story of desperation. I started with his personal bank accounts. The balances were low, shockingly low for a man who wore Italian loafers. I dug deeper, tracing transfers to offshore accounts that were flagged in my system as high risk. Then I found it. A series of massive outgoing payments to a shell company in Nevada. I ran a quick background check on the company. It was a front for an online gambling syndicate. I pulled up the transaction logs. Poker, sports betting, high-stakes blackjack. Brad wasn't just a gambler. He was a degenerate addict. He was down $700,000. The house of cards he had built was on fire, and he was trying to put it out with gasoline. That explained the rush to sell Grandpa's land. He didn't care about development or luxury condos. He needed cash to pay off loan sharks before they broke his legs. But as satisfying as it was to find Brad's weakness, the next discovery made my blood run cold. I navigated to the Family Trust Fund portal. This was the account Grandpa had set up years ago to cover his medical expenses and the maintenance of the estate. My father, Marcus, had been given power of attorney over this specific account 5 years ago when Grandpa had his first stroke. I filtered the search results for the last 5 years. I expected to see payments to doctors, pharmacists, and insurance companies. Instead, I saw a hemorrhage of cash. There was a withdrawal of $12,000 labeled miscellaneous medical. I cross-referenced the date. It matched the exact week my mother and father went to Cabo San Lucas. There was another withdrawal for $50,000 labeled physical therapy equipment. I traced the vendor ID. It was a luxury car dealership in Buckhead. That was how my father bought his Mercedes. I felt sick, physically ill. For 5 years, every time they told Grandpa that insurance premiums were going up or that his medication was becoming more expensive, they were lying. They were stealing the money meant to keep his heart beating and using it to fund their vacations and facelifts. I downloaded every statement, every receipt, every fraudulent ledger entry. I saved it all to an encrypted drive. Then I closed the laptop, wiped my fingerprints from the keyboard, and walked to the library. I triggered the mechanism behind the bookshelf and slipped into the panic room. Grandpa Elijah was sitting in his leather armchair staring at the security monitors. He looked tired. The light from the screens cast deep shadows on his face. "Grandpa," I said softly. He turned to look at me. "Did they leave?" "Yes," I said. I pulled a chair close to him. "Grandpa, I need to show you something, and it is going to hurt." I opened my tablet and showed him the spreadsheet I had just compiled. I walked him through the numbers. I showed him the gambling debts that Brad was trying to cover by selling the ancestors' land. And then I showed him the trust fund. "Grandpa," I whispered, pointing to the line items. "Dad did not buy a new oxygen tank in 2021. He bought a diamond necklace for Mom. They have been draining your medical fund. I watched his face closely, afraid the shock might actually give him a heart attack. But Elijah Washington was made of sterner stuff. He stared at the screen for a long time. His eyes tracked the dates and the amounts. He stole my breath, Grandpa said, his voice barely a whisper. He stole my breath to buy a car. He leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. A single tear escaped rolling down his cheek. It wasn't the tear of a victim. It was the tear of a father realizing he had raised a wolf. I am so sorry, Grandpa, I said, reaching for his hand. Do not be sorry. He opened his eyes and they were hard as flint. Be thorough. Is there more? There is, I said. I went back up to the kitchen one last time before the family returned. I needed to check Brad's email drafts. People often write things they are too afraid to send, or they save drafts to edit later, thinking they are safe. I opened the drafts folder. There was one email saved at 6 a.m. this morning. The subject line was simply, urgent. It was addressed to a lawyer named Saul Goodman, not the TV character, but a notorious disbarred attorney who operated out of a strip mall. I opened the email and read the text. Saul, the old man, kicked the bucket last night. We have a problem. The deed transfer was never notarized. I am going to sign it myself. I need you to backdate the notary stamp to last Tuesday. I will pay you double the usual rate. Just make it look legal. We need to close the deal with the developers by Friday. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This wasn't just greed or embezzlement. This was conspiracy to commit fraud. This was forgery. This was a felony that carried a prison sentence of 10 to 20 years. I took a screenshot of the draft. I took a photo of the screen with my phone to prove the metadata and the timestamp. Just as I hit save, I heard the rumble of the Range Rover in the driveway. They were back. I quickly closed the browser windows, returned the laptop to its sleep state, and grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl. I leaned against the counter, taking a bite, just as the front door swung open. Brad walked in first, carrying shopping bags. He looked at me, chewing on my apple. Still here, he grunted. I smiled at him. A genuine, terrifying smile. Just having a snack, Brad, I said. You know what they say. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. Or the lawyer, I thought to myself. My mother breezed in behind him, holding a garment bag. Oh, Sophia, you are still wearing those rags, she sighed. I hope you are not planning to stand near the casket looking like that. I looked at her, thinking about the $12,000 she stole from a dying man to pay for her tan. Don't worry, Mom, I said. I have the perfect outfit planned. You are going to be surprised. I walked past them, heading for the stairs. I could feel the hard drive in my pocket burning against my leg. They were planning a funeral for Friday. They thought they were burying a problem, but they had no idea that on Friday they wouldn't be the ones shoveling dirt. They would be the ones getting buried. The apple I was eating turned to ash in my mouth as Brad slammed a thick envelope onto the kitchen island. The paper slid across the marble and hit my arm. It was a notice from the county tax commissioner. The letters were bold and red. Final notice. Line imminent. What is this? Marcus Brad shouted, his voice cracking with a mixture of panic and rage. You told me the title was clean. You told me the estate was solvent. I have a buyer landing in 48 hours, and I just found out there is a $50,000 tax lien on the property. We cannot sell a house with a lien on it. My father Marcus looked at the paper and then at my mother. He shrank into his expensive suit, the bluster from the morning evaporating instantly. I thought the trust fund covered that, Marcus mumbled, avoiding eye contact. Beatrice, you said you sent the check last November. My mother froze. She was in the middle of unboxing a pair of Jimmy Choo heels she had bought for the funeral. She looked up, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. I did send it, she lied, her voice shrill. Or maybe I forgot. It was a stressful month, Marcus. That was when we went to Cabo. I cannot be expected to remember every little bill. Every little bill, Brad roared. It is 50 grand, Beatrice. And now, with penalties and interest, they are threatening to seize the property before we can even list it. If we do not pay this by close of business today, the deal is dead. My buyer walks. The room fell silent. The air was thick with the realization of their own incompetence. They had drained the accounts so dry buying cars and vacations that they had forgotten to pay the taxes on the very roof over their heads. Then slowly, like sharks smelling blood in the water, 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Sophia has money, Chloe said, looking up from her phone. She is always bragging about her savings. I took a step back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew exactly where this was going. No, I said, shaking my head. Absolutely not. That is my life savings. I have been saving for a down payment on my own house for 10 years. Beatrice walked over to me. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip tight and painful. Her nails dug into my skin through my t-shirt. Sophia, honey, she said, her voice dripping with poisonous sweetness. This is a family emergency. Grandpa's legacy is at stake. If we lose the house to the government, it will be a stain on his memory. You do not want that on your conscience, do you? It is not on my conscience. I argued, my voice trembling with a mix of genuine anger and calculated fear. It is on yours. You stole the money from the trust fund. I saw the records. You spent the tax money on your Mercedes, Dad. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. Enough, he bellowed. How dare you accuse me of theft in my own house? I am your father. I put clothes on your back. I put food in your mouth. And now when the family needs you, you want to hoard your money like a miser. We need 50,000, Brad said, stepping into my personal space. Transfer it, now. I cannot, I cried. It is everything I have. If you do not transfer that money, my mother hissed, leaning close to my ear, then you are no longer a Washington. We will cut you off completely. You will not be allowed at the funeral. You will not be allowed to say goodbye to your grandfather. And I will make sure everyone in Atlanta knows that you let this house get seized because you were too selfish to help. I looked at them. My father red-faced and drunk. My mother cold and calculating. Brad predatory and desperate. And Chloe recording everything from the corner of the room. I knew Grandpa was watching from the panic room. I knew he was seeing them extort his granddaughter to clean up their mess. I needed to make this transaction undeniable. I needed proof that they were forcing me to pay a debt that wasn't mine under duress. Fine, I sobbed, letting the tears flow freely now. I will do it, but please promise me this means I can stay. Promise me you won't throw me out after I pay. Brad rolled his eyes. Just pay the damn bill, Sophia. We are not monsters. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I opened my banking app. I navigated to the wire transfer screen. $50,000. It was a number that represented late nights, skipped vacations, and years of discipline. I entered the county tax commissioner's account number, not Brad's. I wanted the paper trail to show I paid the taxes directly, establishing my financial stake in the property. I am hitting send, I whispered, holding the phone up so they could see. Do it, Marcus yelled. I pressed the button. Processing. Approved. My savings account balance dropped to 0. The screen flashed a green check mark. There, I said, looking up at them through my tears. It is done. The lien is cleared. Brad snatched the tax notice off the table and crumpled it up. Good, he said, already turning back to his laptop. Crisis averted. I will call the title company. My mother released my shoulder and dusted off her hands as if touching me had soiled her. Well, that is settled then, she said breezily. Stop crying, Sophia. It is unbecoming. You did the bare minimum for this family. Do not expect a medal. I stood there feeling hollowed out. They had taken my money, but they had given me something far more valuable. In the state of Georgia, paying the property taxes on a home can create a legal claim to the asset, especially when coupled with the coercion I had just recorded on my own device in my pocket. They thought they had robbed me. In reality, they had just sold me a share of the house for pennies on the dollar. But the humiliation wasn't over. From the corner of the room, a high-pitched giggle broke the tension. Chloe was holding her phone up, the ring light reflecting in her eyes. "Oh my God, you guys are not going to believe this," she said to her screen. I looked over. She was live streaming. "Chloe, what are you doing?" I asked, wiping my face. She turned the screen toward me. I saw my own tear-stained face looking pathetic and broken. "I am just updating the fans," Chloe said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Guys, look at my sister. We just asked her to chip in for Grandpa's final expenses, to help save the family home, and she literally threw a tantrum over money." She panned the camera back to herself, making a sad face. It is just so hard when family cares more about their bank account than their loved ones. She finally paid, but look at her. So ungrateful. Grandpa gave her a place to live for free, and she acts like a victim because she has to pay one bill. My phone buzzed in my hand. A notification from Instagram. Chloe had tagged me. I looked down at the screen. The video was already climbing in views. The comments were scrolling by faster than I could read. "What a selfish brat," one comment read. "She looks like she hates her family," read another. "Cut her off," wrote a third. The caption under the video read, "POV. When your sister is a cheapskate who refuses to help with the funeral costs. Heartbroken emoji. Broken heart emoji." I looked up at Chloe. She was smiling at her phone, liking the hate comments that were destroying my reputation in real time. "You posted it," I whispered. Chloe shrugged. "Content is content, sis. Maybe if you were nicer, people wouldn't hate you." I turned and ran. I ran up the stairs past the master bedroom where my mother was already hanging up her new clothes, past the guest room where my father was pouring another drink. I ran into the small attic room they had left for me and locked the door. I sank to the floor, clutching my phone. The internet was tearing me apart. Strangers were calling me names, threatening me, laughing at my pain. My reputation as a professional auditor was being dragged through the mud. But as I sat there watching the view count rise, I stopped crying. I took a deep breath. Let them watch, I thought. Let the whole world watch. Because Chloe had just made a fatal mistake. By broadcasting this to the world, she hadn't just shamed me. She had created a time-stamped public record of their cruelty. She had shown the world exactly who they were before the grand reveal. I opened my laptop and logged into a secure server. I uploaded the screen recording of the bank transfer. I uploaded the audio of them threatening to disown me. And then I downloaded Chloe's video. I wiped my eyes. I was $50,000 poorer. I was the most hated woman on my sister's timeline, but I had never been closer to winning. I stood up and walked to the mirror. I fixed my hair. I washed my face. "Enjoy the likes, Chloe," I said to my reflection. "Because they are the last thing you are ever going to own." I walked back downstairs with red eyes and a calculated tremble in my hands. The sound of their laughter died down as I entered the living room, replaced by the heavy silence of judgment. Chloe was on the sofa, scrolling through the comments on her video, a smirk playing on her lips. Brad and my father were huddled over the kitchen island, looking at blueprints for the condo development. They looked up at me with annoyance, as if my mere existence was an interruption to their grand plans. "I am sorry to interrupt," I said, keeping my voice low and submissive. "But I was packing my things in the guest closet like you asked, and I found something." Brad didn't even look up from the blueprints. "Unless you found a winning lottery ticket, Sophia, we do not care." I pulled a small rusty key out of my pocket. It was an old key to a garden shed that hadn't existed for 20 years, but to them it looked like a mystery. It was taped behind the loose baseboard I lied, spinning the web that would catch them. And there was a note attached to it. It said, "For the vault at First National. Access code 774. The reaction was instantaneous. The blueprints were forgotten. My father's head snapped up so fast I heard his neck crack. My mother, who had been reapplying her lipstick in the hallway mirror, froze. The vault. My father repeated, his eyes widening. He used to talk about that. He said that was where he kept the liquid assets. Gold, bonds, unmarked cash. Brad snatched the key from my hand. "Why didn't you tell us this earlier?" he snapped, holding the key up to the light as if it were a diamond. "I just found it," I stammered. "But there is a problem. The note says the box requires dual authentication, the key and a biometric scan, or in the absence of the account holder, a notarized power of attorney granting full access to a designated beneficiary." The room went quiet. The air was thick with greed. They were imagining stacks of gold bars. They were imagining their debts vanishing. But they were also hitting a wall. Grandpa was dead, or so they thought, which meant no biometric scan, and probate court would take months to appoint an executor to open the box. Brad did not have months. Brad barely had days. "We cannot wait for probate," Brad muttered, pacing the floor. "The tax lien is paid, sure, but I have loan sharks breathing down my neck. I need that cash now." He turned to my father. "Marcus, you are the son. Can't you just go down there and demand access?" "It does not work like that," I interjected softly. "The bank is very strict. Without a power of attorney signed before his death, they will seal the box until the court order comes through." Brad slammed his hand on the counter. "Damn it. So close." He looked at the key in his hand, then at the calendar on the wall. A dark idea was forming behind his eyes. I could see the gears turning. He looked at my father, then at my mother. "He was lucid last week, right?" Brad asked, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Before he died. He was signing checks. He was making decisions." My mother caught on immediately. "Yes," she said slowly. "He was very sharp on Tuesday." So Brad continued, walking over to his briefcase. "If he had signed a power of attorney on Tuesday granting granting the family access to his financial affairs, that would be valid. The bank would have to honor it. But he didn't sign when I said, playing the role of the naive obstacle." Brad ignored me. He pulled a fresh, crisp document out of his briefcase. It was a standard legal power of attorney form. He had stacks of them, likely prepared for his real estate scams. He sat down at the dining room table right in the center of the room. This was perfect. The chandelier above him concealed a high-definition camera that was recording audio and video in 4K resolution. "Sophia, bring me one of the old man's canceled checks," Brad commanded. "I need a reference for what I asked." "Just get it," he barked. I walked to the drawer where Grandpa kept his old utility bills. I pulled out a check from 2 years ago, one with his signature clearly written in blue ink. Elijah J. Washington. It was a signature that commanded respect. A signature that had signed deals to build community centers and scholarships. I handed it to Brad. He placed it on the table next to the blank legal form. My father stood over his shoulder, watching intently. Chloe even put her phone down, sensing that something major was happening. "You have to get the loop on the J right," my father advised, pointing at the check. He always flared it out at the end. "I know how to forge a signature," Marcus, Brad snapped, then caught himself. I know how to replicate his handwriting. I have seen it enough times." He picked up a heavy fountain pen. The scratching sound of the nib against the paper seemed amplified in the quiet room. I stood back, arms crossed, trying to control my breathing. This was it. This was the moment they crossed the line from being terrible people to being felons. Brad practiced on a scrap piece of paper first. He signed Elijah J. Washington. He frowned. He did it again. "Too shaky," my mother critiqued, leaning in. "Make it bolder." He was an arrogant man. He wrote with confidence. "Like this," Brad asked, signing again. "Better," my father said. "That looks exactly like it." Brad took a deep breath. He moved the pen to the official legal document. The power of attorney. He dated it for exactly 1 week ago, 3 days before the supposed death. I watched the pen touch the paper. Every stroke was a nail in his coffin. He signed the name. Elijah J. Washington. Then he signed his own name as the witness and had my father's sign as the second witness. There, Brad said, capping the pen with a satisfying click. He held the document up to the light, admiring his handiwork. That is a valid legal instrument, he declared, a grin spreading across his face. As far as the bank is concerned, Elijah gave me full control of his assets last Tuesday. But isn't that wrong? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I mean, he didn't actually sign it. Brad stood up and walked over to me. He waved the forged document in my face. History is written by the winners, Sophia, he said, his arrogance radiating off him like heat. And we won. With this paper, I am the king of this house. I control the accounts. I control the land. I control the vault. And there is nothing you or your dead grandfather can do about it. My mother clapped her hands together. Wonderful. Now we can pay off the debts and still have plenty left over for the renovation. Brad, you are a genius. I am, aren't I? Brad agreed, tucking the document into his breast pocket. We will go to the bank first thing tomorrow morning. We will empty that vault before the death certificate is even filed. He looked at me with a smirk. And Sophia, since you were so helpful in finding the key, maybe I will let you keep the garden shed. You can live in it. The whole family erupted in laughter. My father slapped Brad on the back. Chloe giggled. My mother looked at me with triumphant pity. I forced a weak smile. Thank you, Brad, I said. That is very generous. I turned and walked away, heading toward the kitchen. I needed a glass of water. My throat was dry, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what I had just witnessed. I poured a glass of tap water and looked at the reflection in the window. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. Inside, the camera in the chandelier blinked silently. They thought they had just unlocked a fortune. They didn't know that the safety deposit box at First National was empty. Grandpa had cleared it out 6 months ago when he first suspected them. The only thing in that box was a single index card with a Bible verse written on it, "The greedy bring ruin to their households." Brad had just forged a federal document to steal nothing. But the crime was real, the intent was real, and the video evidence was crystal clear. I took a sip of water. The trap had snapped shut. Now we just had to wait for them to walk into the bank and try to use the key. That was when the steel jaws would really bite down. I heard Brad popping a champagne cork in the living room. To the new owner of the Washington estate, he toasted. I raised my water glass in the silent kitchen. To the new inmate, I whispered. The invitation said 6 o'clock, but the vultures began arriving at 5:30. My mother called it a celebration of life cocktail hour, but anyone with eyes could see it was a networking event for the morally bankrupt. The house, usually a sanctuary of quiet dignity, had been transformed into a nightclub for the real estate elite of Atlanta. The furniture in the living room had been pushed against the walls to make room for high-top tables draped in white linen. A jazz band was playing in the corner, but they were not playing Grandpa's favorites. They were playing generic, upbeat elevator music, the kind that encourages people to drink faster and talk louder. I stood in the kitchen adjusting the collar of the black uniform my mother had thrown at me an hour earlier. She had fired the professional waitstaff Brad had hired. Why pay for service, she had argued, when we have Sophia? She is not doing anything else to contribute. So there I was, the granddaughter of the deceased, holding a silver tray of crab cakes, preparing to serve the people who were salivating over his grave. When I pushed through the swinging doors into the living room, the noise hit me first. Laughter, clinking glasses, boisterous conversations about interest rates and zoning laws. There was not a single tear in the room. I scanned the crowd looking for Grandpa's friends. I looked for Deacon Jones from the church. I looked for Mrs. Higgins, who used to bake him peach cobbler. I looked for the men he played chess with at the community center. They were not there. Instead, the room was filled with strangers in Italian suits and women dripping in jewelry. These were the developers, the investors, the sharks Brad was trying to impress. I began to circulate through the room. I became invisible, just a pair of hands holding a tray. This gave me the perfect vantage point. "Nice place," I heard a man with a thick cigar say to his colleague. "Good bones. Shame we have to tear it down. The lot alone is worth 3 million. "Yeah," the colleague replied, grabbing a crab cake without looking at me. "Brad says the old man was a hoarder, says the inside is a gut job anyway." I bit my lip and kept walking. A hoarder. Grandpa was a historian. He preserved our culture. But to these people, history was just clutter. Then I saw my mother. Beatrice was standing near the fireplace holding court with a glass of champagne in one hand. She was not wearing black. She was wearing a dress the color of fresh blood, bright crimson silk that hugged her body. It was a dress for a gala, not a wake. It was a statement. She was the queen of the castle now. She spotted me and snapped her fingers. "Girl, bring the tray over here," she commanded. "Mr. Henderson is empty." I walked over, keeping my eyes lowered. Mr. Henderson, a man with teeth that were too white, looked me up and down. "Is this the help?" he asked my mother. "Oh, this is just Sophia," my mother said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "She is the one I told you about, the one with no ambition. We are trying to teach her the value of hard work." Henderson laughed. "Well, every family has a black sheep. So Beatrice, about the inheritance. I heard the number 10 million thrown around. Is that accurate?" Beatrice beamed, leaning in close. "That is a conservative estimate, darling. Once we liquidate the portfolio and sell the land rights, we are looking at 12, maybe 15. I have already booked a trip to Paris to celebrate. I mean to mourn." She winked. Actually winked. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. I turned away before I dropped the tray, heading toward the patio doors for fresh air. That was when I saw Brad and my father Marcus standing in the corner with a man I recognized from the news. It was the owner of the largest funeral home chain in the state, a man known for upselling grieving families. I slipped behind a large potted palm tree and pretended to rearrange the napkins on my tray. The hidden microphone I had clipped to the plant earlier was recording, but I needed to hear this with my own ears. So Brad was saying, swirling the ice in his scotch. "We need to keep the costs down tomorrow. I saw the invoice for the mahogany casket. $5,000. That is ridiculous." "It is top of the line," the funeral director said smoothly. "For a man of Elijah Washington's stature—" "He is dead," Brad interrupted. "He does not know the difference between mahogany and plywood. Just give us the cheapest box you have, the one you use for the indigents. We will drape a flag over it so no one sees the wood." My father nodded in agreement. "And what about the burial plot? The cemetery is asking for 10 grand for the spot next to my mother." 10 grand. Brad scoffed. "Rip off. Look, change of plans. We are not burying him. Cremation is what, $500. Cremation?" The director hesitated. "But the obituary said burial." "Who cares what the obituary said?" my father snapped. "We will burn him. It is cleaner. And we do not have to pay for a plot upkeep fee every year." "And the ashes?" the director asked. "Do you want a decorative urn? We have a beautiful marble one for 2,000. Brad laughed, a loud barking sound that made heads turn. 2,000 for a jar? No way. Just put him in the plastic bag and cardboard box. We will toss him in the Chattahoochee River on the way home. He liked fishing, right? It is fitting. And it is free." I gripped the edge of the tray so hard the metal dug into my palms. They were going to throw him in the river like trash. They were going to deny him his final resting place beside his wife, simply to save money they intended to spend on designer bags and sports cars. "It is actually a blessing he went when he did." My mother's voice drifted over. She had joined the circle, smelling of expensive perfume and rot. "How so?" the funeral director asked, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Well, we were looking at nursing homes last week," Beatrice said, taking a sip of her drink. "If he had stayed alive, we were going to have to put him in that state facility off the highway. You know the one. Smells like bleach and boiled cabbage. We could not have him living here anymore, cramping our style. It would have been a nightmare dealing with the paperwork to get him declared incompetent. This way is much cleaner. Clean, my father agreed. He did us a favor by dying. My vision blurred. The rage was white-hot, blinding. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the tray and shatter every glass in the room. I wanted to tear that red dress off my mother and wipe the smug look off Brad's face. But then my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I took a deep breath, composed my face into a mask of servitude, and walked back toward the kitchen. Once the swinging doors closed behind me, I pulled out my phone. It was a text from Lawyer Vance. He is watching, the text read. He says, "Go upstairs." I looked up at the security camera mounted in the corner of the kitchen. I gave a small nod. Deep below the floorboards inside the soundproof panic room, Elijah Washington sat in his leather chair. The iPad in his hands was trembling, but not from age. He was watching the high-definition feed from the living room. He had heard every word. He had heard his son call him a burden. He had heard his daughter-in-law call his death a favor. He had heard the man he welcomed into his family plan to dump his ashes into a dirty river to save a few dollars. The grief on his face had hardened into something else, something ancient and terrifying. It was the look of a patriarch who realized he had raised parasites. He set the iPad down on the desk. He reached for the secure landline phone. His hand was steady now. The tremor was gone. He dialed a number. "Vance," he said, his voice deep and resonating in the small room. "I am here, Elijah." The lawyer's voice came through the speaker. I heard it all. "It is enough," Elijah said. "I have seen enough. Do you want to wait until the burial service?" Vance asked. "No," Elijah said. "We end this tomorrow at the church. I want the police there. I want the press there." And Vance, "Yes, Elijah." "Bring my white suit," he said. "The one I wore when I built this company. If I'm going to come back from the dead, I want to look like the boss." He hung up the phone. He looked at the screen one last time at his family, laughing and drinking his wine, celebrating his demise. "Enjoy the party," he whispered to the screen, "because the hangover is going to last forever." Upstairs, I walked out the back door and sat on the porch steps. The night air was cool. I could hear the crickets chirping, indifferent to the evil inside the house. I checked my watch. 12 hours. Just 12 more hours until the doors of the church opened. I looked at the river flowing in the distance, dark and silent. They thought they were going to throw him in there. They thought they could erase him. I smiled into the darkness. Tomorrow they were going to find out that Elijah Washington was not ash. He was fire. And he was about to burn their whole world to the ground. The last luxury sedan pulled out of the driveway at midnight, leaving a trail of red taillights fading into the darkness. The silence that followed was brief, lasting only until the front door clicked shut. Then the mask of the grieving united family fell away, shattering into a million sharp pieces on the floor. I sat at the top of the stairs, hidden in the shadows of the landing, my phone recording every decibel of the chaos erupting in the living room below. They thought I was asleep in the attic. They thought Grandpa was rotting in a morgue. They were wrong on both counts. Downstairs, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the smell of expensive scotch. Brad had loosened his tie and was pacing around the coffee table like a caged tiger. My father, Marcus, was slumped on the sofa, clutching a bottle of Grandpa's vintage brandy as if it were a life raft. My mother, Beatrice, was counting cash from a thick envelope she had likely skimmed from the catering budget, while Chloe was busy editing the photos from the party to make herself look thinner and sadder. "All right, listen up." Brad's voice cut through the room, loud and aggressive. "We need to settle the split before the sun comes up. I have done the math. The land is worth $3 million. The house is worth $2 million. The liquid assets, once we crack that trust fund, are another $5 million. That is $10 million on the table." $10 million. My mother sighed, a dreamy look in her eyes. "I can finally buy that villa in Tuscany." "Not so fast," Beatrice, Brad snapped. "Here is how it is going to work. I get 60%. The room exploded. My father shot up from the sofa, spilling brandy on the Persian rug. 60%, Marcus roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Are you out of your mind? I am the son. I am the heir. This is my father's money. You are just the son-in-law. You get 20%, and you should be grateful we let you in the door. Brad laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed off the high ceilings. You are the heir, Brad sneered, walking up to my father and poking him in the chest. You are a liability, Marcus. Who forged the signature on the power of attorney? Me. Who found the buyer for the land? Me. Who is taking all the legal risk if the feds come sniffing around? Me. You are just a drunk who could not even run a lemonade stand, let alone an estate. Without me, you would be crying in a homeless shelter. Don't you speak to him like that? My mother shrieked, jumping to her husband's defense. He is the patriarch now. Patriarch? Brad spat. He is a gambler, Beatrice. Tell her, Marcus. Tell her where the tuition money for Chloe's master's degree went. My father froze. Chloe looked up from her phone, her eyes narrowing. What is he talking about? Dad, Chloe asked. You said the bank lost the transfer. He bet on horses, Brad announced with gleeful malice. He took 50 grand of your education fund and put it on a horse named Lucky Lady in the 5th race. The horse broke a leg, just like your dad's finances. Chloe gasped, throwing a pillow at her father. You liar! You told me to apply for student loans because of the economy. My father, cornered and humiliated, lashed out. He turned on my mother, his eyes wild. Oh, you want to talk about betrayal, Brad? Let's talk about why Beatrice needs that villa in Tuscany. It is not for the wine. It is for the tennis instructor she has been sleeping with for 3 years. My mother dropped the stack of cash. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. You knew, she whispered. Everyone knows Beatrice, my father shouted. Even the old man knew. He just didn't say anything because he didn't want to embarrass the family. But I saw the texts. Meet me at the club. Bring the champagne. You are disgusting. Stop it! Chloe screamed, covering her ears. Stop it, all of you. We are supposed to be a family. Brad turned his predatory gaze onto his wife. Oh, shut up, Chloe, he said coldly. You are the worst of them all, playing the perfect little angel. Does your mother know how you got the money for your nose job? Chloe's face went pale. Brad, don't, she pleaded. She told Grandpa she was pregnant, Brad said, looking directly at my mother. She told him she needed $20,000 for medical expenses for the baby. She said she miscarried a week later. My mother looked at Chloe. You told me you used your savings for that surgery. She lied, Brad said. There was no baby, just an abortion clinic and a plastic surgeon. She scammed a dying old man out of 20 grand to fix her nose and get rid of an inconvenience. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. It was the silence of a nuclear wasteland. Every secret, every lie, every betrayal they had hidden for years was now out in the open, festering on the living room floor. They looked at each other, not as family, but as accomplices who despised one another. I shivered on the stairs. I knew they were bad. I knew they were greedy. But this was a level of moral rot I hadn't imagined. They had lied about babies. They had cheated on spouses. They had gambled away futures. And all of it was funded by the man whose death they were celebrating. Brad broke the silence. He poured himself another drink, his hands steady. See, he said calmly, we are all filth. We are all guilty. That is why I get 60%, because I am the only one honest enough to admit that I am doing this for the money. You people pretend it is about love or legacy. I know it is just business. So, 60%. Take it or I walk, and I take the fake power of attorney with me. Without that paper, you get nothing. My father slumped back onto the sofa, defeated. My mother picked up the cash she had dropped. Chloe wiped her eyes, careful not to smudge her eyeliner. Fine, my father whispered. 60%. Just get it done. I checked my phone. The recording was clear. The confession was absolute. I had them. Not just for fraud, but for the destruction of their own characters. I stood up, my knees cracking slightly. It was time for my entrance. I walked down the stairs, my bare feet silent on the wood. I stepped into the living room, a ghost in pajamas. They all jumped. Brad spilled his drink. My mother clutched her chest. Jesus! Sophia, Brad yelled. How long have you been standing there? Long enough, I said, my voice steady. I looked at each of them. I looked at the father who gambled away his daughter's future. I looked at the mother who cheated. I looked at the sister who lied about a life to fund her vanity. And I looked at Brad, the architect of their ruin. I have a question, I said softly. What? Brad snapped. Aren't you afraid? I asked, looking around the room. Aren't you afraid that he is watching you? Aren't you afraid that Grandpa's spirit is right here listening to you carve up his life like a piece of meat? Don't you believe in retribution? For a second, a shadow of fear crossed my father's face. He looked toward the empty hallway as if expecting a ghost. But then Brad laughed. It started as a chuckle and grew into a loud, belly-shaking roar. He laughed until he choked on his scotch. Retribution, Brad wheezed. Ghosts. Grow up, Sophia. My mother joined in her laughter, shrill and hysterical. Oh, honey, you are so naive. Chloe smirked, checking her reflection in her phone screen. Spirits don't pay the bills, Sophia. Brad walked over to me. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, smelling of alcohol and arrogance. Let me teach you a lesson about the real world, Sophia, he whispered, grinning like a shark. The dead are dead. They don't watch, they don't listen, and they certainly don't come back to punish the living. He is gone. He is just a pile of bones in a box. Dead men don't talk, you stupid girl. I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't blink. Are you sure about that, Brad? I asked. I am positive, he said, turning his back on me. Now go to bed. We have a funeral to fake in the morning. They went back to their drinks, laughing at my superstition, clinking their glasses to their 60-40 split. I turned and walked back up the stairs. Dead men don't talk, I repeated to myself. I reached the top of the landing and looked down at them one last time. No, I thought. Dead men don't talk. But men who are pretending to be dead, they scream. And tomorrow, Grandpa Elijah was going to scream so loud the whole world would hear it. My mother's voice sliced through the humid air of the sanctuary like a serrated knife. She did not whisper. She hissed loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. Sophia, sit down. You are making a scene. You are embarrassing this family for the last time. Do not make me call security. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had birthed me but never loved me. I looked at my father, who was staring at his shoes, unable to meet my gaze, and at Chloe, who had actually stopped live streaming because the tension was too real even for her content feed. Then I looked at Brad, standing behind the pulpit, clutching his stolen authority, like a shield, his eyes darting nervously between me and the exit. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had worn in days. It felt cool and sharp on my face. I am not making a scene, Mother, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the church without a tremor. And I am not standing up to speak for myself. I am standing up to give the floor to the only person in this room who actually matters. Because frankly, I think he disagrees with the eulogy. My mother looked confused. Brad furrowed his brow. Who are you talking about? Brad snapped into the microphone, his voice booming with artificial bravado. Sit down, Sophia. The service is over. Not quite, I whispered. At that exact second, the heavy double oak doors at the very back of the church groaned. It was a low, mournful sound, the sound of ancient hinges turning against their will. The noise echoed through the vaulted ceiling, causing every single head in the congregation to turn. The sunlight from the vestibule flooded in a blinding white rectangle against the dim, candlelit interior of the sanctuary. Dust motes danced in the beam of light. At first, all anyone could see was a silhouette, a tall, broad-shouldered shadow framed by the glare. Then the figure stepped forward out of the light and into the nave. A collective gasp sucked the oxygen out of the room. It sounded like the airlock of a spaceship opening. He was wearing a white suit, the same white linen suit he had worn 40 years ago when he cut the ribbon on his first office building in downtown Atlanta. It was immaculate, pressing against his chest, a red silk handkerchief in the pocket. He held a cane in his right hand, polished ebony with a silver handle. He did not look like a ghost. He did not look frail. He looked like a king returning from exile to reclaim a stolen throne. It was Elijah Washington. He took a step. Tap. The cane hit the hardwood floor. He took another step. Tap. He was alive. My mother let out a sound that I can only describe as a strangled squeak, like a mouse being stepped on. Her eyes rolled back in her head, her knees buckled, and she slumped sideways. She slid off the pew in slow motion, landing in a heap of red silk on the floor. No one moved to help her. Not my father, not Chloe, not the guests. They were too paralyzed by the sight of the dead man walking. My father Marcus gripped the back of the pew in front of him so hard his knuckles turned white. His mouth hung open, his jaw practically unhinged. The blood drained from his face so fast, it looked like he had been embalmed. He started shaking, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that rattled the wood of the pew. He looked at his father, then at the empty space where the coffin should have been, and then back at his father. His brain could not compute the reality. He began to hyperventilate, wheezing for air. Chloe dropped her phone. It clattered onto the floor, the screen cracking, but she didn't even blink. She just stared, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with the terror of a child who realizes the monster under the bed is real. But Brad was the masterpiece of terror. He stood frozen at the microphone, the glass of water in his hand slipping from his sweating fingers. It hit the floor and shattered, the sound ringing out like a gunshot in the silent church. Shards of glass scattered across his shoes, but Brad did not flinch. He could not look away. He was staring at a nightmare. He was staring at the man whose signature he had forged, whose money he had stolen, whose death he had celebrated with champagne just 12 hours ago. Grandpa Elijah did not rush. He walked down the center aisle with a slow, deliberate cadence. Tap, step, tap, step. He did not look at the guests who were whispering and pointing. He did not look at the flowers. He kept his eyes locked on the pulpit. He looked only at the thieves who were currently occupying the front row. As he passed the rows of friends and neighbors, people started to stand up, not in fear, but in reverence. Old Deacon Jones stood up and bowed his head. Mrs. Higgins put a hand over her heart. They recognized the power in his walk. Grandpa reached the front. He stopped in front of the first pew. He looked down at my mother, who was unconscious on the floor. He stepped over her legs as if she were a piece of discarded furniture. He looked at my father, who shrank back, cowering like a beaten dog. Grandpa didn't say a word to him. The disappointment in his eyes was louder than any scream. He ascended the 3 steps to the altar. He walked behind the pulpit. Brad tried to back away, but he tripped over his own feet and stumbled against the organ. He was trapped. He was cornered between the man he tried to kill and the congregation he tried to con. Grandpa Elijah stood next to the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces. Then he turned his head slowly, painfully slowly, to look at Brad. Brad was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. Grandpa reached out and adjusted the microphone. He lowered it slightly. He tapped it twice to ensure it was on. Thump, thump, the sound boomed through the speakers, making everyone jump. Grandpa leaned in close to the mic. His voice was deep, gravelly, and filled with the cold fire of retribution. "Go on, son," Grandpa said. The words echoed. "Go on, son." Brad opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping on a dock. "Finish your story." Grandpa continued, his voice calm, but terrifying. "You were telling them about my final moments. You were telling them how peaceful I looked. You were telling them how I held your hand and gave you my blessing to sell my land." Grandpa took a step closer to Brad, forcing him to lean back over the railing. "Tell me, Brad." Grandpa roared, his voice suddenly rising to a thunderous crescendo that shook the stained glass windows. When exactly did I hold your hand? Was it before or after you forged my signature? Was it before or after you planned to throw my body in the river to save $500? The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. You could hear Brad's heart breaking in his chest. Brad stuttered. He tried to speak. He tried to lie, but the words died in his throat. I... Brad squeaked. Grandpa smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Speak up, Brad," Grandpa whispered into the mic. "The whole world is listening. And I think the police officers at the back of the room are very interested in the end of this story." Grandpa Elijah did not raise his voice. He did not scream or shout or throw the heavy cane he held in his hand. He simply looked at Brad with a gaze so heavy it seemed to physically push the man down. The silence in the church was thick, suffocating, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the frantic, shallow breathing of my father Marcus, who was still trembling in the front pew. "You asked when I held your hand," Grandpa said calmly, his voice amplified by the speakers. "You asked for the truth. Well, I believe in evidence, son. I believe in showing, not just telling." He turned his head slightly, locking eyes with me, where I stood by the audiovisual booth at the back of the sanctuary. He gave a barely perceptible nod. I felt a surge of electricity run through my veins. This was the moment. The button under my finger felt hot. I pressed it. A low, mechanical hum filled the room as the massive projector screen slowly descended from the ceiling behind the pulpit. It came down like a white guillotine blade, blocking the view of the cross, replacing religious judgment with digital justice. The room darkened as I killed the house lights. A single beam of light shot from the projector, hitting the screen with crystal-clear resolution. The first video began to play. It was footage from the dining room chandelier camera. The angle was high, looking down on the table where Brad sat with a pen in his hand. The timestamp in the corner read 2 days ago. The audio was crisp. "Make the loop on the J bigger?" My father's voice rang out from the speakers, echoing through the church. "I know how to forge a signature," Marcus the Brad on the screen snapped. The congregation gasped, a collective intake of breath that sounded like all the air leaving the room at once. On the screen, Brad practiced the signature over and over again. "Elijah J. Washington. Elijah J. Washington." Then he signed the legal document and held it up, grinning. "With this paper, I am the king of this house," the digital Brad declared. In the real world, the real Brad covered his face with his hands. He sank to his knees, not in prayer but in defeat. "That is a felony," someone shouted from the back. It was Mr. Henderson, the real estate developer. Even the sharks were offended by the amateurism of the crime. I did not stop. I clicked the next file. The screen flickered and changed. Now it was the living room camera focused on the bar area. My mother Beatrice was visible. She was wearing the red dress, the same one she was currently wearing while lying in a faint on the floor. In the video, she was holding a martini glass. "The funeral director says the urn is $2,000, my father's voice said in the video. "2,000? Beatrice scoffed on the huge screen. Her face was twisted in disgust. "Don't be stupid, Marcus. Just put the old man in a plastic bag. We will dump him in the Chattahoochee River on the way back from the crematorium. It is free. Nobody cares where he ends up. He is just ash." The reaction in the church was visceral. It was not just shock, it was horror. Mrs. Higgins, sitting in the third row, stood up. She was trembling with rage. She pointed a shaking finger at my mother's prone body. "You devil," Mrs. Higgins screamed. "You wicked, wicked woman! He took you in when you had nothing." People began to stand up. The murmurs turned into a roar. The facade of the respectable Washington family was crumbling in real time, exposing the rot underneath. But I wasn't done. There was one more person who needed to be exposed. I clicked the third file. The video showed Chloe sitting on the sofa, her face illuminated by the ring light of her phone. She was talking to my father. "I don't care about the legacy, Dad," the video, Chloe said, rolling her eyes. "I just want my cut. Frankly, the old man dying is the best thing that could have happened to me. It is lucky, really. Now I can finally afford to upgrade my apartment. I was sick of visiting him anyway. He smelled like old books and medicine. The video ended on a freeze frame of Chloe's face distorted in a selfish sneer. In the pew, the real Chloe shrank down, trying to make herself invisible, but there was nowhere to hide. The youth choir members who used to look up to her were staring at her with open disgust. Her followers, if they were watching a live stream, were seeing the real unfiltered Chloe for the first time. Grandpa Elijah turned back to the microphone. The screen behind him was still frozen on Chloe's face. He looked out at the angry crowd. He raised a hand and the room fell silent again. But this time it was a silence of respect, of waiting for the king to pass sentence. He looked down at his son, his daughter-in-law, his grandchild, and the man who had married into his house. "I gave you a home," Grandpa said softly. "I gave you an education. I gave you the shirt off my back. And in return, you planned to erase me. You planned to steal the land my father bought with money he earned picking cotton. You planned to throw me in a river like garbage." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You wanted my assets," Grandpa said. "You wanted my attention. Well, you have it now, but you also have the attention of the state of Georgia." He looked toward the side door of the sanctuary. "I invited a friend to the service today," Grandpa said. "Someone who is very interested in that document you signed, Brad." The heavy wooden door on the side of the altar opened. Sunlight streamed in again. A tall man in a beige uniform stepped through. It was Sheriff Miller. He was not just the local law enforcement. He was Grandpa's fishing buddy for 30 years. He knew every story, every sacrifice, and every hope Grandpa had for this family. And his face was stone cold. Sheriff Miller walked up to the altar. His boots clacked loudly on the wood. He carried himself with the authority of the law, but his eyes were burning with personal anger. He looked at Brad, who was still on his knees. He looked at the shattered glass and the wet stain on the floor. "Bradford Jenkins," the sheriff boomed. "Marcus Washington." My father looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Miller, please," he sobbed. "It was a misunderstanding. It was a joke." "Forgery is not a joke," Marcus, the sheriff said, reaching for his belt. "Conspiracy to commit fraud is not a joke. And elder abuse, that is definitely not a joke." The sheriff pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal glinted in the light of the projector screen. Grandpa Elijah stepped back. He did not look happy. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had just cut off a gangrenous limb to save the body. He looked at me one last time. I stood at the back of the room, my hand still on the laptop. We locked eyes. There was no triumph in his gaze, only a deep shared understanding. We had won. But the price of victory was the death of the family we thought we had. "Take them," Grandpa whispered into the microphone. And as the sheriff snapped the cuffs onto Brad's wrists, the sound was louder than any prayer that had ever been spoken in that church. It was the sound of consequences finally arriving. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the world. It echoed off the vaulted ceiling, final and absolute. Sheriff Miller did not handle Brad gently. He grabbed him by the shoulder of his expensive suit, the fabric bunching up under the sheriff's grip, and hauled him to his feet. Brad was dead weight. His legs were jelly. The arrogance that had fueled him for years had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified child. Bradford Jenkins, the sheriff, said, his voice carrying to the back of the room without a microphone. "You are under arrest for 2 counts of felony forgery in the first degree. You are under arrest for wire fraud regarding the $50,000 transaction you coerced from Sophia Washington. And you are under arrest for the abuse and exploitation of an elder person." Brad began to weep. It was a pathetic, snotty sound. "No, wait," Brad stammered, looking wildly around the room. "It was not me. I mean, it was not my idea. It was Marcus. Look at him. He is the son. He told me to do it. He said the old man was incompetent. I was just following orders." My father Marcus, who was still slumped in the pew, looked up in horror. You liar, Marcus screamed, finding his voice. You said you would handle everything. You said you were the businessman. Don't you drag me into this. Sheriff Miller ignored them both. He began to recite the Miranda rights, the words flowing like a rhythmic chant of doom. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. As the reality of the situation crashed down, my mother Beatrice seemed to remember that she was a conscious human being. She scrambled up from the floor, her red dress tangled around her legs. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black streaks. She looked at Brad in handcuffs, then at the sheriff, and finally she threw herself at the altar railing, reaching out for Grandpa Elijah. "Dad, please," she wailed, her voice cracking. "You cannot let them take him. He is family. Think of Chloe. Think of the scandal. We can fix this. We can pay the money back. Just tell the sheriff to stop. Please, Dad, have mercy on us." Grandpa Elijah looked down at her hands, which were clutching the polished wood of the railing. He did not reach out to touch her. He did not soften. He simply adjusted his grip on his cane. "Mercy." Grandpa repeated the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. "You talk of mercy. Where was your mercy when you planned to throw my body in the river? Where was your mercy when you stole my medicine money to buy jewelry? Where was your mercy when you tried to evict Sophia onto the street?" Beatrice sobbed louder, a theatrical performance meant to sway the crowd. But the crowd remained silent. No one was buying the ticket to her show anymore. "I am sorry," Beatrice cried. "We were lost. We were grieving. We made mistakes." Grandpa leaned over the pulpit. His shadow fell over her, dark and immense. "Stop it, Beatrice," he commanded. The sharpness of his tone cut through her wailing. "Look at me." She looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. "You are not crying for me," Grandpa said, his voice low and deadly. "You are not crying because you are sorry. You are crying for your wallet. You are crying because you just realized the gravy train has derailed. You are weeping for that villa in Tuscany and the trips to Paris that you will never take." He straightened up and turned to face the entire congregation. He looked at the business partners, the bankers, the neighbors, and finally he looked directly at me. "Let me make one thing perfectly clear to everyone in this room," Grandpa announced. "The Washington estate is no longer open for looting." He pulled a document from the inside pocket of his white suit. It was not a forgery. It was a thick, blue-backed legal document with a gold seal. "This morning at 8 a.m., I filed a new trust," Grandpa said. "It is an irrevocable trust. For those of you who do not know the law, that means it cannot be changed, it cannot be broken, and it cannot be touched by anyone named Marcus, Beatrice, Chloe, or Brad." My father let out a strangled gasp. My mother stopped crying instantly, her face going pale. "I have transferred every asset I own," Grandpa continued, his voice ringing with authority. "The land, the house, the stocks, the bonds, even the car in the driveway. It all belongs to the trust now. And I have appointed a single sole trustee to manage it." He pointed his cane toward the back of the room, straight at me. "Sophia Washington is the only person with the power to sign a check. She is the only person with a key to the house. If you want a dime, you ask her. If you want to step foot on my property, you ask her. And knowing my granddaughter, I suggest you do not hold your breath." My father stood up, shaking. "But Dad, that is millions. We are destitute. We have debts. The loan sharks." Grandpa looked at his son with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Then I suggest you get a job, Marcus," he said. "I hear the car wash on Main Street is hiring." The sheriff tugged on Brad's arm. "Let's go, Jenkins." "No, no," Brad screamed as he was dragged toward the side aisle. "This is illegal. You cannot do this. I have rights. Sophia, help me. Tell him. We are family." I watched him go. I watched the man who had threatened to bulldoze my history being dragged out like common trash. I felt nothing but a cool, calm satisfaction. "Get them out of my church," Grandpa said, gesturing to my parents and Chloe. Deacon Jones and two other large men from the choir stepped forward. They did not need to use force. The sheer wall of disapproval from the community was enough. My mother scrambled to her feet, clutching her purse. She looked at the crowd, desperate for an ally, but all she saw were turned backs. My father hung his head, broken. Chloe grabbed her shattered phone and ran for the door, not waiting for anyone. As they stumbled down the aisle, the walk of shame was absolute. No one whispered. No one offered a hand. They were exiles in the very place they had come to conquer. Grandpa Elijah watched them go until the heavy oak doors swung shut behind them, sealing the silence. He took a deep breath, and for the first time his shoulders slumped slightly. The king had won the war, but the battlefield was empty. He looked at me across the pews. I closed the laptop. I walked down the long aisle past the staring eyes up to the altar. I stood beside him and took his hand. It was warm. It was alive. "We are okay," I whispered to him. He squeezed my hand. "Yes, Sophia. We are okay." Sheriff Miller returned from the side door, dusting off his hands. "They are in the squad car, Elijah," he said. "It is done." Grandpa nodded. Then he turned to the congregation, raised his cane, and spoke with a twinkle returning to his eye. "Well," he said, "since we are all here and I am clearly not dead, I believe there is a reception catering paid for in the fellowship hall. I would hate for those crab cakes to go to waste." Laughter broke out in the room. Real laughter this time, tension released. The darkness had been purged, and the light, harsh but clean, had returned to the House of Washington. I looked at the stained glass window, and for a moment I could have sworn the saints were smiling down on us. The parasites were gone. The work of rebuilding could finally begin. The parking lot of the Ebenezer Baptist Church was silent, except for the distant sound of cicadas buzzing in the Georgia heat. Inside the fellowship hall, I could hear the faint sounds of joyous gospel music and the clinking of silverware as the congregation celebrated the resurrection of Elijah Washington. But out here on the asphalt, the air was thick with the stench of desperation. My parents and Chloe were standing by their cars. They had not left. They were waiting for me like predators who had been defanged, but still thought they could bite. When they saw me walk down the church steps, shading my eyes from the sun, they straightened up. My mother Beatrice wiped her smeared mascara and put on her best mask of maternal concern. My father Marcus tried to look authoritative despite having just been publicly disowned, and Chloe was frantically tapping on her phone, her face pale. "Sophia." My mother called out, taking a step toward me. Her voice was trembling, a perfect mix of victimhood and accusation. "Sophia. Honey, please. We need to talk. You cannot just leave things like this." I stopped 10 feet away from them. I did not move closer. I kept my distance the way one stands back from a burning building to avoid the heat. "There is nothing to talk about, Mom," I said calmly. "Grandpa said it all inside. You heard him." "Oh, stop it," my father snapped, stepping in front of his wife. "He is an old man, Sophia. He is senile. He does not know what he is doing. You are manipulating him. You are taking advantage of his confusion to steal our inheritance." I almost laughed. The gaslighting was so predictable it was boring. They were trying to rewrite reality, even as the handcuffs were still cooling on Brad's wrists in the back of the police cruiser. "I am manipulating him," I asked, tilting my head. "Was I the one who forged a signature dad? Was I the one who spent his medical money on a sports car? Or was I the one who sat by his bed every night while you were in Cabo?" "We are your family," my mother interrupted, clutching her chest. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head. How can you be so cruel? How can you turn your back on your own flesh and blood over money? We made a mistake, sure, but families forgive. That is what we do. We forgive." She took another step, reaching out her hand. "Come on, Sophia. Talk to him for us. Tell him to drop the charges against Brad. Tell him to tear up that trust. If you do this, we can go back to normal. We can be a family again." I looked at her hand. It was the same hand that had slapped me when I was a child for speaking out of turn. It was the same hand that had thrown my suitcase down the stairs yesterday. "Normal," I repeated. "You want to go back to normal. You mean the normal where I am the scapegoat? The normal where I am the invisible servant while you worship Chloe? The normal where you drain Grandpa dry and wait for him to die? I reached into my purse. I did not pull out a tissue to dry my tears. I pulled out 3 thick white envelopes. That normal is dead, I said. And so is this family. I stepped forward and shoved the envelopes into my father's chest. He grabbed them reflexively. What is this? He asked. It is a restraining order, I said. For all 3 of you. And for Brad whenever he makes bail. It states that you are not to come within 500 feet of Elijah Washington, myself, or any property owned by the Washington Trust. If you violate it, you go to jail, immediately. My mother gasped. You cannot do this. You cannot ban us from our own home. It is not your home, I said coldly. It never was. It was Grandpa's home. You were just guests who overstayed your welcome by 40 years. Suddenly, a wail erupted from behind the Mercedes. It was Chloe. She dropped her phone on the pavement and looked up at us, her eyes wide with genuine terror. My brand deals, she screamed. They are gone, all of them. What are you talking about? My father asked, distracted from the legal papers. The live stream, Chloe sobbed, picking up her cracked phone. The one I did this morning. The one where I called Grandpa a lingering burden. Someone screen recorded it. It is viral on Twitter. It has 2 million views. She held up the screen. I could see the notifications cascading down like a waterfall of doom. Skinny T just emailed my agent, Chloe cried. They are dropping me. The Fashion Nova deal is cancelled. Even the hair vitamin company said I am a liability. They are calling me a monster. People are digging up old tweets. They are finding out about the nose job money. My career is over. She looked at me, her eyes burning with hatred. This is your fault, she shrieked. You planned this. You set me up. I looked at my sister, the golden child who had finally tarnished. I did not make you press the record button, Chloe, I said. You wanted to be famous. You wanted the world to see your life. Well, congratulations. You finally went viral for being your authentic self. Chloe lunged at me, her perfectly manicured claws reaching for my face. But she didn't get far. A shadow fell over us. It was Sheriff Miller. He had stepped out of the church side door and was watching the scene with his arms crossed. I would not do that if I were you, Miss the Sheriff called out, unless you want to join your brother-in-law in the county lockup. Chloe froze. She lowered her hands, trembling with impotent rage. My mother looked at the sheriff, then at the restraining orders, and finally at me. The realization finally hit her. There was no manipulation left. There were no cards left to play. She was not the victim. She was the defendant. You are a cold-hearted bomb, my mother hissed, her voice low and venomous. I should have never had you. I smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was free. Maybe not, I said. But Grandpa is glad you did. I turned my back on them. I walked across the parking lot toward the reserved space near the front entrance. Sitting there gleaming in the sunlight was the 1968 Jaguar E-Type. The car my father had tried to take the keys to yesterday. The car they wanted to sell to pay off Brad's gambling debts. I pulled the keys from my pocket. They jingled softly. I opened the driver's side door and slid into the leather seat. It smelled of old leather and Grandpa's cologne. It smelled of history. I put the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine roared to life, a deep, throaty growl that vibrated through my chest. I rolled down the window and looked at them one last time. They stood in a cluster in the middle of the empty asphalt. My father holding the legal papers that barred him from his inheritance. My mother crying over her lost lifestyle. Chloe staring at a black screen that used to be her career. They looked small. They looked pathetic. And for the first time in my life, they looked like strangers. Goodbye, Mom, I said. I shifted the car into gear. I did not look back in the rearview mirror as I drove away. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. And as I turned onto the main road heading back to the estate to begin the rest of my life, The only thing I felt was the wind in my hair and the sweet, heavy weight of freedom. The first thing I did when I pulled the Jaguar back into the estate driveway was breathe. For the first time in months, the air didn't smell like tension or deceit. It smelled like magnolia and wet earth the way it was supposed to. But the silence of the house was not a signal to rest. It was a signal to work. We had cut out the cancer, but the wound still needed to be stitched up. Monday morning began not with a celebration, but with a purge. I drove to the headquarters of Washington Holdings, the modest brick building downtown that Grandpa had bought in the 80s. Under Brad's brief and disastrous reign as the self-appointed manager, the office had transformed into a fraternity house. He had fired Mrs. Gable, the receptionist who had been with us for 20 years, replacing her with a 20-year-old college dropout who spent more time on TikTok than answering phones. I walked through the glass doors wearing a navy blue suit and holding a clipboard. The receptionist didn't even look up. "Can I help you?" she mumbled, popping gum. "You can pack your things," I said, not breaking stride. "Excuse me," she asked, finally looking up. "You are terminated," I said, pushing past the desk. "Your final check will be mailed to you. You have 5 minutes to clear your personal effects." I didn't wait for her reaction. I marched straight to the executive wing. Brad had filled these offices with his cronies, men who wore too much cologne and knew nothing about community development. They were sitting in the conference room laughing at a sports recap, feet up on the mahogany table. They froze when I entered. One of them, a guy named Rick, who had once asked me to fetch him coffee during a board meeting, smirked. "Hey, Sophia," he said. "Brad isn't here yet. He is running late." "Brad isn't coming," I said, placing my briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. "Brad is currently being processed at the county jail for felony fraud, and since his authority was illegitimate, so are your contracts." Rick's smirk vanished. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the fact that you are trespassing," I said. "I have security waiting in the hallway. You have surrendered your company laptops and keycards. If you are not out of this building in 10 minutes, I am adding criminal trespassing charges to the list of legal problems your friend Brad is facing." The room scrambled. It was a chaotic symphony of zipping bags and hushed cursing. I watched them leave, these men who had leached off my grandfather's legacy, and I felt the building heave a sigh of relief. By noon I was on the phone with Mrs. Gable. She cried when I asked her to come back. By 2 o'clock she was back at her desk, organizing the files Brad had thrown into disarray. We spent the rest of the week rehiring the old maintenance crew, the accountants who actually followed the law, and the project managers who cared about the tenants. It was not just about business. It was about restoring the soul of the company. The restoration of the house was more personal. I found the old gardener, Mr. Abernathy, sitting on his front porch across town. He had been fired by my father because he refused to cut down the ancestral oak trees. When I pulled up and told him the trees were safe and his job was waiting, he put on his hat and climbed into my car without a word. Together, we walked through the garden. The damage Brad's crew had done was significant, but not fatal. They had torn up the rose bushes, but the roots were deep. "We can save them, Miss Sophia," Mr. Abernathy said, kneeling in the dirt. "It will take time, but the soil is good." That afternoon, I brought the Romara Bearden painting to a specialist. The frame was destroyed, but the canvas was intact. When I hung it back on the wall in the foyer 3 days later, it felt like putting a bandage on a jagged cut. The house was healing. I walked through the rooms, opening the curtains my mother had kept closed, letting the light chase away the shadows of their greed. I put the jazz records back on the shelf. I polished the wood where Brad's drill had scarred the office door. Every action was a reclamation. But while we were rising, they were falling. The reality of their situation hit them not in a courtroom, but in the sterile, fluorescent-lit waiting room of the county detention center. I learned the details later from Sheriff Miller, who recounted the story with a grim satisfaction. Brad had used his one phone call to call my mother. He was frantic. He was weeping. He told her the bail was set at $500,000 because he was considered a flight risk. "B, you have to get me out," Brad had screamed into the receiver. "Sell the jewelry, sell the cars, just get the cash." My mother. Beatrice stood at the bail bondsman's window with her platinum credit card. She was wearing sunglasses to hide her swollen eyes, hoping to be recognized as the wealthy socialite she had pretended to be for decades. She handed the card to the bondsman. "Run it," she said imperiously. The bondsman ran it. Declined. She frowned. "Try it again. It must be a chip error." He ran it again. Declined. "Code 404. Account frozen." She pulled out another card. Declined. She pulled out a debit card. Declined. "I am sorry, ma'am," the bondsman said, sliding the plastic back to her. "These accounts have been locked by a court order. The issuer says the funds are under investigation for connection to fraud." My mother stood there, her hands shaking. She realized then that the restraining order and the trust fund were not just pieces of paper. They were iron bars. Grandpa had not just cut them off. He had flipped a switch and turned off their lives. She had to pick up the phone and tell her husband, the man she had conspired with, that she could not save him. "I have no money, Brad," she whispered into the receiver. "What do you mean you have no money?" Brad yelled, his voice cracking. "You have a closet full of Chanel. They are holding it as evidence," Beatrice sobbed. "The police seized the house contents this morning. They said it was purchased with stolen funds. They took the Mercedes, Brad. They took my shoes. I had to take a bus here." The line went dead. Brad dropped the phone and slid down the wall of his cell. He was not going to a luxury villa. He was going to spend the next 18 months fighting over a top bunk with a stranger. My parents and Chloe did not fare much better. With the estate locked down and their personal accounts frozen pending the investigation into the embezzlement, they had nowhere to go. Their friends in high society stopped answering their calls the moment the news of the arrest broke. The country club revoked their membership. The fancy restaurants canceled their reservations. They ended up in a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex on the south side of the city, the kind of place my father used to drive past and make jokes about. It was a second-floor walk-up with peeling beige paint and a smell in the hallway that vacillated between boiled cabbage and stale cigarettes. I drove by once a week after the eviction just to see. I saw my father Marcus struggling to carry a bag of groceries up the stairs. He looked older. The arrogance was gone from his posture, replaced by the heavy slump of a man who knows he has lost everything. He was wearing a t-shirt and jeans stripped of the expensive suits that had been his armor. I saw Chloe sitting on the balcony staring at her phone. She wasn't filming. She was just staring. The ring light was gone. The glam squad was gone. She was just a girl in a cheap apartment realizing that without the backdrop of wealth, she had no content. She looked up and saw my car. For a second, our eyes met. She didn't glare. She didn't scream. She just looked away, ashamed. I didn't feel happy seeing them like that. I didn't feel sad either. I felt a profound sense of balance. The universe had corrected itself. That evening I sat with Grandpa Elijah in the sunroom. The windows were open, letting in the evening breeze. The crickets were singing a chorus of peace that replaced the arguments and the lies. We were drinking tea from his favorite porcelain set, the one my mother had tried to sell at a pawn shop years ago, but I had managed to hide. Grandpa looked younger than he had in years. The weight of the secret was gone. The toxicity was gone. He was just an old man enjoying his garden. "You know," Grandpa said, looking out at the magnolia tree I had just watered, "people always think revenge is about noise. They think it is about shouting and fighting and making the other person hurt." He took a sip of tea, his hand steady. "But real revenge is quiet," he continued. "It is silence. It is peace." He looked at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Do you feel bad for them, Sophia?" I thought about it. I thought about Brad in his cell. I thought about my mother taking the bus. I thought about my father carrying his own groceries. "I feel like they are finally living the life they earned," I said. Grandpa nodded. Exactly. We didn't ruin them, Sophia. We just took away the cushion. We took away the lie. Now they have to wake up every morning and be exactly who they are without my money to hide behind. He set the cup down. The best revenge is not to harm them, he said softly. The best revenge is to let them live with their own uselessness. Let them sit in that small apartment and realize that they had paradise, and they traded it for a quick buck. That realization will hurt more than any jail sentence. I looked at him, this man of iron and grace. And what about us, Grandpa? I asked. What is our revenge? He smiled, leaning back in his chair. Us, he said. We are going to drink this tea. Then we are going to listen to some Coltrane. And tomorrow, we are going to build a new community center on the land they wanted to sell. He closed his eyes, listening to the wind in the trees. Our revenge is simply being happy, Sophia. Our revenge is thriving. I sat back, letting the truth of his words wash over me. The war was over. The cleanup was done. The house was clean not just of dust and debris, but of the heavy, suffocating weight of ungratefulness. I poured us both another cup of tea. To thriving, I said. Grandpa opened his eyes and clinked his cup against mine. To thriving, he agreed. And as the sun set over the Washington estate, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, I knew that the real legacy wasn't the money or the land. It was this peace. And it was finally wholly ours. 6 months ago, I was hiding in a dusty attic, afraid that my family would leave me homeless. Today, I am standing in a corner office on the 42nd floor of the Washington Tower, looking out over the Atlanta skyline. The city looks different from up here. It does not look like a battlefield anymore. It looks like a promise. On my mahogany desk sits a fresh copy of Forbes magazine. The cover features a woman in a sharp navy power suit standing next to a distinguished older gentleman with a silver cane and a mischievous smile. The headline reads, "The Phoenix and the Patriarch: How Sophia and Elijah Washington Redefined Black Excellence." It is strange to see my face on a newsstand. For 35 years, I was told I was invisible. I was told I was the background character in everyone else's movie. Now I own the studio. My assistant buzzes the intercom. "Ms. Washington, the board of directors is ready for you in the conference room." "Thank you, Jessica," I say. "I will be right there." I pick up my portfolio. It is not filled with forensic audits of other people's crimes anymore. It is filled with blueprints for the future. Since taking over as CEO of the Washington Trust, I have restructured the entire company. We stopped selling off land to predatory developers like Brad. Instead, we started building. We are breaking ground next week on a mixed-use community center in the 4th Ward that will provide affordable housing and small business grants for local entrepreneurs. I walk into the conference room. The air is respectful. The men who used to put their feet on the table are gone, replaced by a diverse team of professionals who actually care about the mission. At the head of the table sits the chairman of the board, Grandpa Elijah. He looks 10 years younger than he did 6 months ago. The stress that was poisoning him has evaporated. His skin is glowing. His eyes are bright. He winks at me as I take my seat at the other end of the table. We do not need to say a word. We know that we built this peace together. After the meeting, we head to the most important event of the day. We are not going to a country club. We are going to the library of the local high school. The room is packed with students, parents, and teachers. There is a buzz of excitement in the air that money cannot buy. I step up to the podium. The microphone does not squeal. My hands do not shake. "Welcome, everyone," I say. "My grandfather and I are not here to make a speech. We are here to make an investment." I gesture to the large check standing on the easel covered by a velvet cloth. For too long, talent in this community has been overlooked because of a lack of resources. I continue. My own family tried to tell me that my value was tied to how much I could give them. But I learned that real value comes from what you can build for others. Grandpa joins me at the podium. We pull the cloth down together. The crowd gasps, then erupts into applause. The Elijah Washington Opportunity Fund. $10 million. This is not a loan, Grandpa says into the mic, his voice strong and clear. This is a promise. Every student in this room who maintains a 3.0 grade average will go to college for free. No debt, no strings attached, just go be great. I watch the faces of the students. I see a young girl in the front row crying. She looks a bit like I did at that age, scared, uncertain. But now she has a safety net I never had. I realize in this moment that this is what Brad and my parents never understood. Money is not for buying Ferraris or villas in Tuscany. Money is a tool to break chains. That evening, the estate is quiet. The renovation is finally complete. The walls are painted a warm cream color. The art is back on the walls. The garden is blooming with winter camellias. It feels like a home, not a showroom. Grandpa and I are sitting by the fireplace in the library. The fire is crackling, casting a golden light over the room. We are drinking hot chocolate, not champagne. We have nothing to prove to anyone. I see a small stack of mail on the side table. Most of it is fan mail or business offers, but there is one envelope that stands out. It is made of cheap, thin paper. The handwriting is jagged and familiar. It has no return address, but I know who sent it. I pick it up. My stomach does not drop. My heart does not race. I feel nothing but a mild curiosity, like looking at an insect under glass. I open it. It is a letter from my mother, Beatrice. Sophia. The letter starts. I hope this finds you well. The heating in the apartment is broken again, and your father's back is getting worse, carrying groceries up the stairs. We saw the article in Forbes. You look beautiful. We miss you so much. We were wondering if maybe we could meet for coffee, just to talk. We are family after all. P.S. Chloe says hello. She is working at a diner now, and it is very hard on her hands. I read the words. I look for an apology. I look for an admission of guilt. I look for a single sentence that acknowledges the crimes they committed. There is nothing. Just complaints and manipulation. Even now, sitting in the cold with nothing left, they still think they can charm their way back into the warmth. They still think I am the naive girl who craved their validation. They are wrong. I do not feel anger. I do not feel the need to call them and scream. I do not feel the urge to write back and tell them how well I am doing. That would still be a connection. That would still be giving them energy. I stand up and walk to the fireplace. What is that, Grandpa asks, looking up from his book. Just a receipt, I say. Just an old bill from a debt that has already been paid. I toss the letter into the fire. I watch the paper curl. I watch the words, "We are family," turn black and crumble into ash. I watch the flames eat the guilt and the obligation until there is nothing left but light and heat. I sit back down and pick up my mug. Grandpa, I say. Yes, my dear. Do you remember how Mom always wanted to go to Paris, I ask? How she wanted to spend your money to buy designer clothes on the Champs-Élysées? I remember, he says. Well, I say, smiling. I was looking at the calendar. I have 2 weeks of vacation saved up, and I hear Paris is beautiful in the winter. Grandpa closes his book. A slow smile spreads across his face. Paris, he muses. I have not been since your grandmother and I went in '68. We sat in a cafe and drank wine, and nobody asked us for a dime. Let us go, I say. This weekend. First class. Not to shop, not to show off, just to walk by the Seine and breathe. Grandpa raises his mug. To Paris, he says. And to us. To us, I reply. The fire pops, and the last remnant of the letter disappears up the chimney, floating away into the cold night air. I settle back into the leather chair. I am Sophia Washington. I am a CEO. I am a granddaughter. But most importantly, I am free. Blood is random. It is just biology. It is just cells and DNA and happenstance. But family is different. Family is loyalty. Family is respect. Family is the people who stand beside you when the world tries to knock you down. Family is a choice. I look at the old man sitting across from me, the man who saved me and whom I saved in return, and I chose right. This story serves as a powerful reminder that family is defined by loyalty and respect, not merely by bloodlines. Sophia's journey illustrates that while greed and manipulation might grant temporary power, integrity and truth ultimately prevail. We learn that setting boundaries with toxic relatives is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary step for self-preservation. Grandpa Elijah's wisdom teaches us that the best revenge isn't harming others, but simply allowing them to face the consequences of their actions while we choose to thrive. If you have ever had to stand up for your own worth against those who should have protected you, please hit the like button and share your story in the comments below.